Welcome to Global Watch. Please subscribe and hit the bell icon for more breaking updates. In a landmark decision that will be studied for generations, the Supreme Court has struck down President Trump's Liberation Day tariffs, declaring them unconstitutional. The ruling, delivered after months of heated debate and anticipation, marks a pivotal turning point in the nation's economic history. With this decision, a defining era of American trade policy comes to a close. The tariffs, once hailed by some as about a bold move to protect American industries, are now officially over, leaving behind a legacy of controversy and debate. The Supreme Court's action dismantles a protectionist trade wall that not only reshaped the U.S. economy, but also sent shockwaves through global markets. For years, these tariffs altered the way American businesses operated, forced companies to rethink supply chains, and strained relationships with key trading partners. Now, the landscape is shifting once again, and both businesses and consumers are bracing for the impact. Billions of dollars in tariffs, which were largely paid by American companies and households, are now in question. Financial markets have responded with volatility, as investors try to predict what comes next for trade, manufacturing, and the broader economy. The ruling reasserts Congress's constitutional authority over taxation and trade, drawing a clear line on the limits of presidential power. Legal scholars say this decision could set a precedent for future administrations, reshaping the balance of power in Washington. Internationally, both allies and adversaries are now forced to reconsider their strategies. The sudden reset of the U.S. trade landscape means new negotiations, shifting alliances, and a period of uncertainty for global commerce. The aftermath is a complex mix of legal challenges, economic adjustments, and political maneuvering. Lawmakers, business leaders, and advocacy groups are already preparing for a new round of debates and court battles as the country adapts to this historic change. The story of the Liberation Day tariffs has reached its dramatic climax, but the consequences for the nation and the world are just beginning to unfold. The coming months will reveal how deeply this decision will affect jobs, prices, and America's role in the global economy. In this video, we'll explore the events that led to this historic moment, the key players involved, and what the end of the Liberation Day tariffs means for America's future in an increasingly interconnected world. The Liberation Day tariffs stemmed from President Trump's belief that America was being exploited by its trading partners. The administration used the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, i.e. EPA, to justify sweeping tariffs, arguing persistent trade deficits were a national emergency. Critics argued IEEPA was never meant for broad consumer tariffs, but for targeted sanctions against adversaries. The tariffs hit a vast array of goods, disrupting supply chains and raising costs for businesses and consumers. The administration's vision of economic self-sufficiency clashed with the realities of a globalized economy. Many saw the move as executive overreach, bypassing Congress and setting the stage for a historic legal battle. This fundamental dispute over presidential authority would soon reach the Supreme Court. The legal fight against the tariffs united businesses large and small, all arguing the president had overstepped his authority. At issue, did IEEPA allow the president to unilaterally impose tariffs, or was this power reserved for Congress? Plaintiffs argued the Constitution gives Congress, not the president, the power to tax. The administration claimed broad emergency powers, but justices expressed skepticism, questioning the limits of executive authority. Justice Sotomayor called tariffs taxes on American consumers, while Justice Barrett worried about unchecked presidential power. The court's pointed questions signaled deep concern over the separation of powers. The stage was set for a landmark decision. On November 9th, the Supreme Court ruled the Liberation Day tariffs unconstitutional, declaring the president had overreached. The majority opinion reaffirmed that only Congress can levy taxes and duties, not the executive branch. The court emphasized that IEPA was never intended as a backdoor for broad-based tariffs. The ruling was a direct rebuke of the administration's legal strategy and a reassertion of Article 1 powers. Evidence showed most tariff costs were passed to American consumers, undermining claims that foreign exporters paid the price. The decision sends a clear message: national emergencies cannot justify bypassing Congress on fundamental economic policy. The power to tax remains with the people's representatives. The tariffs collected over $100 billion in revenue for the government, but this windfall came at a steep cost. Instead of foreign exporters shouldering the burden, it was American businesses and everyday consumers who paid the price. From the moment the tariffs were imposed, the effects rippled through the economy, touching nearly every household and business in the country. About 80% of the increased costs were passed down the supply chain, ultimately landing on the shoulders of American families. Prices on everyday goods, from groceries to appliances, rose steadily, squeezing household budgets and forcing many to make difficult choices about what they could afford. For some, it meant cutting back on essentials or delaying important purchases. The policy acted as a regressive tax, hitting lower and middle-income families the hardest. Those with the least financial flexibility felt the impact most acutely, as a larger share of their income went toward basic necessities. The gap between what families needed and what they could afford grew wider, deepening economic anxiety across the country. U.S. manufacturers, many of whom rely on imported parts and materials, faced higher production costs. This made it harder for them to compete both at home and abroad. Some businesses tried to absorb the costs, but many had no choice but to raise prices or cut jobs, putting additional strain on workers and local economies. The tariffs, intended to protect American industry, often ended up hurting the very sectors they were meant to help. Factory closures and layoffs became more common, especially in communities already struggling with economic challenges. Economists argued that focusing on the trade deficit was misguided. The U.S. has long run trade deficits as part of its role in the global economy, and tariffs did little to address the underlying causes. Instead, they disrupted supply chains and created uncertainty for businesses. The real impact was widespread economic pain, lost jobs, shuttered businesses, and higher prices, without solving the deeper issues at play. Many small businesses, already operating on thin margins, struggled to survive. As inflation persisted and businesses continued to struggle, the flaws in the policy became impossible to ignore. The promise of economic protection gave way to the reality of rising costs and financial hardship for millions. The Supreme Court's decision brought a glimmer of hope for relief, but for many Americans, the damage had already been done. The long-term effects of these policies would linger, shaping the economic landscape for years to come. With the tariffs struck down, the government faces the daunting task of refunding over $100 billion to importers. Identifying who paid, verifying amounts, and processing claims will take years, not months. Many businesses have closed or changed hands, complicating the process. New lawsuits are emerging as companies fight for their share of refunds. President Trump's plan to use tariff revenue for dividends and debt relief is now moot. The Treasury must manage a massive, unplanned outflow, straining federal finances. For businesses, refunds could be a lifeline, but the wait will be long and uncertain. The administrative chaos underscores the far-reaching consequences of the policy. The Supreme Court's decision sent shockwaves through Washington, rebalancing power between Congress and the president. The ruling is a victory for congressional authority and a setback for executive overreach. Democrats and some Republicans see validation for their long-standing criticism of unilateral tariffs. Congress may now take a more active role in trade policy, curbing future executive actions. Public opinion had already turned against the tariffs, with most Americans blaming them for higher prices. Recent elections reflected this discontent, as voters punished those associated with the policy. President Trump faces political fallout, with declining poll numbers and a weakened agenda. The debate over trade and presidential power has been fundamentally reshaped. Legal and economic experts agree, the court has set a crucial boundary on executive power. Law professor John Yoo notes the president must now use more specific, constrained legal tools for tariffs. Economists like Mark Bush argue the ruling ends a policy that harmed prosperity and lacked sound justification. The justices' skepticism during oral arguments highlighted the real-world impact on Americans. Justice Sotomayor's blunt assessment, tariffs or taxes, cut through political spin. Trade experts predict the ruling will ease some international tensions, but warn of uncertainty ahead. The administration must rethink its trade strategy, with Congress now central to future decisions. The debate over protectionism versus free trade moves from the White House to Capitol Hill. The Supreme Court's landmark ruling brings an end to the controversial Liberation Day tariffs, a policy that has shaped the nation's economic landscape for years. This decision marks a pivotal turning point in how America approaches its trade relationships and economic strategy. The ruling forces a nationwide reckoning, compelling both leaders and citizens to reconsider the balance of power between the executive branch and Congress when it comes to trade. For many, it's a moment of uncertainty, but also one of hope for a more transparent and accountable system. By reaffirming Congress's constitutional authority over economic policy, the court's decision restores a vital check on presidential power. Lawmakers now face the responsibility of crafting trade laws that reflect the will and needs of the American people. This new era of checks and balances is designed to prevent future executive overreach, ensuring that no single office can unilaterally reshape the nation's economic destiny. In the immediate aftermath, the challenge is immense. Government agencies must unwind the complex tariff regime, process refunds to businesses and consumers, and restore stability to disrupted supply chains. Yet, the long-term impact is even more profound. America now faces a fundamental shift in how trade decisions are made, with greater emphasis on open debate, legislative oversight, and public input. Critical debates over jobs, economic growth, and fairness are returning to Congress, where elected representatives must weigh the interests of workers, businesses, and communities across the nation. The future of U.S. trade policy will be shaped not just by lawmakers, but by the voices of ordinary Americans, through public engagement, advocacy, and informed discussion. This is a moment for national reflection and learning, as citizens seek to understand the complexities of global trade and the impact of policy decisions on their daily lives. Participation is more important than ever. By attending community meetings, voting, and sharing ideas, Americans can help shape the nation's economic path for generations to come. The end of the tariff era is not just a legal milestone, it's an invitation for every citizen to play a role in defining what comes next. Stay informed, get involved, and make your voice heard. Together we can help define the nation's future in a post-tariff world, one built on collaboration, accountability, and shared prosperity.